morning, everybody. This is RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Dr. Mark Eckel. We are doing Warp and Woof Radio this morning, and we come to you every Wednesday from 10 to noon. And this morning we have Phil sitting in for HB. HB is out and about doing his thing elsewhere, and we are here warping and woofing. Just to remind everybody what Warp and Woof stands for. We are interested in seeing the vertical and horizontal threads of all of life connected. We see that because of the connection that only Jesus can make. Colossians 1:17, by him are all things held together. Coherence, the great doctrine of the church. Phil, good morning. How you doing, brother?
Hey, man, I am blessed to be here, excited to be here. I always count it a privilege when HB gives me the call and says he can't make it. I said, oh, man, I'm sorry to hear that.
As he has a big smile on his face. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about our guests here in the second hour and kind of lead into that for the second hour.
Okay. I've got some personal friends, guests of mine that have been very instrumental in my life, in my testimony as I've fallen and found myself caught up in the legal system, and God placed certain people in my path in the restoration period of my life. And first guest, Bud Ruby, was very, very instrumental in keeping me held accountable, coaching, mentoring, even as a father figure, if you will. And it brought to my attention how important it is to have a good supporting team. You know, there are no championships won without a good team. I don't care if it's an individual sport or actual team sport. When you look at the road to the championship, you'll find a team that supported that individual to achieve that level of success. And so the guest that we have here today, I would consider a part of my team. The next guy is Isaac Walters. He's in real estate investments. He's just a real tough, I'm going to tell you like it is type of guy. And you need somebody like that in your corner. And Isaac's business is dealing with real estate, particularly in the area to help veterans into home ownership. And Isaac is one that can stand on the sidelines and tell you where you went left or where you went right. And Bud does it with love. Isaac does it with fire and brimstone. And so I've got kind of the best of both worlds there. You know, the way Isaac is bluntly and brutally honest. Don't like it at the time, but it makes you go back in the corner and think about, okay, yeah, he's right, and let's get back on the right track.
Now I know what I'm going to be up against here in the second hour.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We got fire and water up in here today. We're looking forward to it. Well, this whole episode today, we're going to focus on business ethics and business principles, and we're going to focus, as we always do, on the book of Proverbs. We'll come back after a short break with some musical highlights and an interlude, and we will be back. You're listening to RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio. You are here at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio, Wednesday morning from 10 to noon every week. We're glad to be with you here again. This week we've got Phil standing in for HB, and we have Isaac Walters and Bud Ruby here in our second hour talking about business principles from Christian vantage point. Phil, lead us in, man. Let us know where we're going with this thing.
We're going deep in it. It's an exciting topic. I think a topic that our listeners will enjoy today. And let me start off, Mark, by asking you, why were the ideas of wisdom so important in the ancient business world?
Yeah, this is an important idea. Whenever we talk about coming out of a biblical vantage point, we always want to begin in the book of Genesis. So wisdom in the ancient world literally meant order. So when you think about wisdom in the book of Proverbs, the concept is order. Everybody wanted order. That was something that folks anticipated, wanted to live with. I mean, even today, I got stopped at a red light that wouldn't turn green for 3 cycles this morning. So, we want order. When there's disorder, we don't like it. So Genesis literally lays out the ancient business traditions, beginning in Genesis 2:15, where God says you're supposed to produce from and then protect what you produce from the creation. So the idea of work or business was not a result of the fall. That's a misunderstanding oftentimes. Work preceded the fall. And that's really important for us to recognize that corruption of all kinds, including that in business, came after Genesis chapter 3. But according to the book of Ecclesiastes, which, by the way, is my favorite book in the Bible.
Really?
Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 18 to 20 tells us that work is a good thing. And that everybody who works does so because we find in it this order that we're talking about. There's just a couple of other comments here. Something that's important in terms of order is we have this tendency to dichotomize or separate between so-called environmental issues or interests and that of the business community. And what we ought to be doing is seeing a cooperative spirit in creational care and the business enterprise. I think it truly is a possibility. I think it's something that we have a tendency to see as adversarial in our culture, which is really a sad thing. Our responsibility as Christians is custodial use. Everybody talks about the issue of ownership. It truly is ownership in an American sense of things that we normally come to. But when you're reading the Bible and you come to places like 1 Chronicles 29, it says anything that I have has been given to you by you, given to us by your hand already. And it says that 4 or 5 or 6 times in 1 Chronicles 29. So while I own things, I'm not the ultimate owner, and I bear the custody, the custodial care of that which has been given to me. So there's a long response to a short question.
I gotta. I'm good at throwing you curveballs.
Go ahead, man. Throw a curve.
You brought up the book of Ecclesiastes.
Oh, boy.
And I will admit, I think I've mentioned this to you before, Mark. Since I've met you, I've taken a deeper look into Proverbs, and I listen to Proverbs every day. And sometimes the Proverbs ends and Ecclesiastes picks up. And it's such a natural flow going into Ecclesiastes. How would you use Ecclesiastes to help the Christian businessman today or woman?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the curve, man. Let me see what we can do with this pitch. Huh? Yeah, Ecclesiastes is a very interesting book. It was written by Solomon, king of Israel. And Ecclesiastes, I believe, was actually written as an evangelistic tract.
Wow.
And it was an evangelistic tract, I believe, to all of those people, those wonderful folks who were coming from all different parts of the globe to hear the wisdom of Solomon. It tells us about 1 Kings chapter 10. One of whom, of course, the most famous one probably is the Queen of Sheba. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about the Queen or anybody else coming to Solomon and seeking wisdom, what was Solomon saying to them? What could he say to the movers and shakers of the day, the entrepreneurs, the business people, the folks who were in charge, the folks who had reached the penultimate top of the ladder, so to speak? Well, what he was saying to them was, look, work by itself means nothing. Wine, women, and song by itself means nothing. Money by itself means nothing. He goes down this long list of things, and he keeps calling it vanity. In the Hebrew, the word there is actually a breath. Literally, you express your breath, and it's gone. That literally is what he is saying. You work, and it's gone. You make money, and it's gone. You have all kinds of fun in life and entertainment in life, and it's gone. Here and gone. But Ecclesiastes emphasizes all the way through, there's a great refrain that runs through the book. Life is a gift of God. Life is a gift of God. So if you have a supernatural, transcendent view of life and things, seeing things coming from outside in, then all of life is given meaning. So work is given meaning, entertainment's given meaning, money is given meaning, and business principles are given meaning.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of business principles throughout Ecclesiastes. But if you're going to ask me what's the connection between the two, Proverbs, I believe, was set up in the mid part of Solomon's life, Ecclesiastes toward the end, where he's looking back and saying, look, this is what I've discovered over all of this time. So There's my answer to your good curveball. How'd I do?
That's great education, and it helped me in as I listen and study Ecclesiastics, because you're right. The theme is meaningless. It's meaningless. It's meaningless, and that takes me to our next question. What does Proverbs have to say about business principles?
Yeah, there are so many of them, and I won't go through every single time that something is mentioned. But let's start with probably the most famous of all, and that's Proverbs chapter 6 and the ant and laziness, right? And that famous word sluggard.
Yeah.
When we're talking about the ant, we're not talking about a sluggard or a lazy person. We're talking about an individual within a community, because, of course, an ant colony literally is a community, that takes the responsibility seriously of to provide for and anticipate the future. There are lots of other statements in Proverbs that talk about business principles. Proverbs 29:24 says that the partner of a thief hates his own life. I'll say that again. Proverbs 29:24. The partner of a thief hates his own life. So who should you be in partnership with?
Wow.
You best think long and hard about that one. That's crucial. Another passage that I would emphasize is Proverbs 27:23-27. That's Proverbs 27:23-27, where he actually goes through and gives business orders. I'll read this. This is really fascinating stuff. Know the condition of your flocks. Give attention to your herds. Now pause there and think about this. Does a business person need to give attention to what he's doing? Well, yes. That seems kind of obvious. For riches don't last forever, Proverbs goes on to say. And does a crown endure to all generations? No. So what is our responsibility as a business person, me as a nonprofit individual, anybody, anywhere? My responsibility, everybody's responsibility, is to plan for the future, because like I said last week, Don Henley said, you don't see no hearses with no luggage racks, baby. We ain't taking this stuff with us. So when we're talking about the issues of life, we're talking about not what am I going to take with me, but who am I going to leave behind, and that's legacy. So when we talk about legacy, we're not talking about what I leave behind, but who I leave behind. The most important, the most powerful impact we can have as leaders, as business leaders, is set this thing up so that we're ready to go. The next generation takes over.
Now, when you talk about the ant and what he's doing, he's focused. He has a purpose greater than himself. Do you think that is a key principle in successful business that comes out of Proverbs?
So, if your first question was a curveball, is this a slider?
This is a changeup.
This is a changeup. There you go. I love the changeup, man. So, yeah, absolutely. When you think about the ant and the responsibility to business community, let me just make this general comment. Certainly applies in this passage, but across the book of Proverbs. The most important thing business leaders can do is take care of their people, to see their business as a family, to see their operation as something that is of necessity, of worth and value to every individual on this team that goes forward. You were emphasizing team a moment ago. I mean, how much more obvious can we do? Can we make this in the month of October when we got baseball players in October trying to be Mr. October on the team? So this is a really crucial issue, and yes, the ant certainly signifies that.
Let me ask you, Mark, what does the rest of the scripture say about business principles?
Yeah, we could spend from now until tomorrow morning talking about this, but I'll make it short and sweet. Let's talk about the issues of biblical character qualities, such as honesty and honoring one's promises. How important might that be to a business, so that the business leader says, hey, you know what, we're putting money aside for your retirement, and we're not going to go into that pension fund and raid it. I mean, wouldn't that be like a first obvious point to anybody in business? Don't take away from the worker. When we're talking about business, we should also talk about working hard and gaining wealth is a good thing, because God said that it's a good thing, and He gave it to us for us to do. One more comment about this. 1 Timothy 6, 17-19, one of my favorite passages when it comes to the wealthy. 1 Timothy 6, 17-19 says, actually gives 4 commands to the rich. And the 4 commands revolve around make sure that you are identifying needs in the community and giving your money away. So there it is, the focus on character qualities, and then what is the business leader going to do to shepherd his people, to care for his people, to take care of his people.
That's awesome. I think that ends our first segment, and we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio, a Comenius Institute-sponsored program every Wednesday from 10 to 12, and we are happy to be with you again this week. We have actually been doing this for 9 months now, Phil. Isn't that kind of cool?
Man,
this is our 36th episode, man. You are here on the 9-month mark. Aren't you pleased about that?
Yeah, I'm privileged.
Well, hit us with some more questions, man.
Oh, man, I've got plenty of them. In our theme of Proverbs and business principles, Christian business principles, give us some contemporary examples of biblical business principles.
Sure. Well, I'll give you two, and I'm just going to mention them kind of generically and briefly, and then tell you a story. Whenever people ask me, where do you get your kind of your references, what's happening in the culture in this regard, I always think about HBR, which is the Harvard Business Review, which I get sent to my email every morning, and I read those things. And then the TED Talk emphasis. So I'm always on TED Talks looking for what the latest entrepreneurs and original thinkers are thinking about. But what I often think about when I read both HBR and I'm listening to TED Talks is the same things going through my mind, and that is this. You pretty much are just copying what's already been done 3,500 or 2,000 years ago, namely in reference to the Bible. So I'm listening to this documentary on television this time, and this commentator, the voiceovers, we're seeing the lay of somebody's land. They come on as a voiceover and they say, in the last 100 years or so, farmers have come to realize that it's good to let your land lay fallow every 7 years. And I'm yelling at the television. That was 3,500 years ago. The book of Leviticus. Do some research. That's my general response to things when I'm by myself. If I'm in a company of individuals, I try to tone that down a little bit. But the bottom line is that the business principles that we see at places like Harvard Business Review or TED Talks or anything else largely originate out of a biblical view anyway. And so when you're reading Proverbs, you look at the newspaper and you're going, gee, I don't see much difference. I wonder why. And the reason is because this is ancient wisdom.
Wow. So it's all been done before.
It's all been there and done before. Yeah, that's right.
He said there's nothing new under the sun.
That's exactly going back to Ecclesiastes,
right.
Actually. Yes, that's right.
Let me ask, how important is our business principles for the Christian life?
Yes. So another story. I started my teaching vocation in Bismarck, North Dakota. I taught there for 6 years, and I was fresh out of seminary, THM program, and so on a young family. My daughter Chelsea was born there. Tyler, of course, came with us out of Indiana. I was actually did my master's degree program here, and then went to Bismarck and taught there for 6 years. Well, bottom line was, when you're in Christian ministry, you're pretty poor all the time. And one of the great things that happened when we were in Bismarck was that we had a tremendous landlord. His name was Stan, and Stan took really good care of us. We had one side of a duplex, probably about 1,000 feet thereabouts, and we had one section of a 2-car garage. And in Bismarck, having a garage is a big deal because it's generally about 20 below zero every night in the wintertime. So it's really cold up there. But bottom line was that Stan gave us this apartment for $250 a month. Didn't charge us for electric, for heat, for anything, because he knew that we weren't making much money. At the time, pretty much for 6 years, we only made about $12,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So when he did this for us, and then he would take us out to eat. We went to the same church. He would take us out to eat on Sunday afternoons, he and his wife. He would buy Christmas presents for our children. Whenever I think about Stan, and I'll meet him again someday when we see each other again in heaven. Whenever I think about Stan, I think about the concept of not a handout, but a hand up. So when I think about Leviticus, for instance, Leviticus 19 says to the business person, hey, when you go in and you take your crop off the field, leave the edges and anything that falls to the ground for the poor. And and allow them to come in and take what's left over, that's a hand up, not a hand out. It's workfare instead of a welfare kind of concept. And when I think about Stan, that's exactly what he did for us. He was a very generous man who gave us an awful lot, very beneficent to us in that sense of things. So he was kind of mirroring what the Creator does for us as the landlord. He owns everything and then allows us to use this in custodial fashion, as I've already mentioned. Another concept here that I wanted to bring forward is this idea of biblical stewardship. And stewardship literally means to create jobs, wealth, opportunity, and community. Private property is a cornerstone of Hebraic law. It's really important that we understand that there are 2 out of the 10 commandments that actually advocate private property, which is don't steal and don't covet. So those 2 concepts are really important. Now, usually when we talk about stewardship, we talk about this as a financial issue. But to me, stewardship is even my leftovers in the refrigerator. If I let something go bad, if I don't use it properly, if there's something that hasn't been properly cared for in that sense of things, then I bear responsibility for that. God has made me to be a steward, and certainly Stan is a great example of somebody who took really good care of what God had given to him. He had formed his own business. He helped other people out like us. He was a very generous man, and yet at the same time God blessed his business with money and so on so that he could be generous to other people. Stewardship, it's a great concept.
Yeah, speaking on that stewardship, here comes
here we go.
Here comes a slider, from the notes and the things that you've done. You reference Proverbs chapter 30, verses 7 through 9, and when I saw that, I said, man, that's a verse of Lord, keep me humble. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about stewardship, and he's basically saying, Lord, bless me with just enough of what I need. And it sounds like Stan got that, not so much as to what he need, but what he could do with what he had. How does that Proverbs principle relate to the business?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So Proverbs 30:7-9 emphasizes, Lord, give me just enough, as Phil has just suggested. But the idea there is don't give me too much so that I forget you, because we become too comfortable. God speaks about this in places like Deuteronomy 4 and Deuteronomy 6, where he says, here are the gardens I'm going to give you in this land I'm going to give you. You didn't plant them. All the walls that are erected, you didn't build. All of the houses that are set up, you didn't build those either. I'm giving everything to you, and so you're responsible for that, but don't forget who gave it to you. So Proverbs says, don't give me too much so I forget you. I become too comfortable in my way of life. And then don't give me too little so that I have to steal and then dishonor you. And so that kind of concept comes through very clearly. And you're right to point this out. It's a really powerful passage that suggests a middle way, that we're grateful for what's been given to us, but we don't want too much or too little.
Right. And that I really like that, and that'll be one I meditate on for quite some time. Let me ask you this question. How can we Christians begin to practice biblical principles in business?
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to say about this would be about materialism. Materialism, I tell people, isn't about what you have, it's about what has you. I'll say that again. Materialism isn't about what you have, it's about what has you. So the ism on the end of any word always suggests a philosophy or a worldview. So how do we think about the things that have been given to us? And when I think about materialism, I'm concerned that I don't fall into the trap of matter is all that matters. The stuff of life is all that matters. And when I think about what I can say to Christians in an American culture where we have pretty much anything that we want, anytime we want it, any place we want it. We can go and get food 24 hours a day. We can go and have entertainment 24 hours a day. We can stream anything, watch anything, listen to anything. We can go places that nobody else ever thought about going. When I was a kid growing up, it was a big deal to cross the state line. Now we're crossing timelines. We got kids climbing an aircraft, going all around the world, doing all manner of stuff, and they don't think a thing about it. I'm going to go to Africa for a week. I'll be back. I'll see you. That kind of stuff. I mean, these kinds of things for those of us who are a little bit older, we look back on this and say, wow, this is such a cool time and place to live. But my concern, especially for Christians, is that they don't forget how much has been given to us, our responsibility for that. That doesn't mean that we have to supply every need of every nation around the world, but what it does mean is that when we see a need, we should meet the need, and we should start where we're living closest to us, and our focus ought to be on others all the time.
Wow, charity begins at home.
Charity begins at home. There you go, man.
That's great. You have any other things that you want to add before we go to our next break?
Yeah, I know we need to take another break. Well, let me just mention a couple of other comments here. One of the things that strikes me when you ask me this question about practicing biblical principles in business is not becoming too emotionally attached to things. Now, what I mean by that is this. In Hebrews chapter 10, it tells us that the folks to whom this book was written were actually involved in persecution at the time. Hebrews 10:32-39 says they were involved in active persecution. But the writer of Hebrews says, well, somebody took your house. At least they didn't take your life. So have we become emotionally detached from what is all around us and don't view our lasting possessions as the thing that we hold in our hands? Like I've been mentioning the last couple of weeks, I love those words from Don Henley. No hearses with luggage racks. So the concept of lasting possessions out of Colossians chapter 3, 1 Peter chapter 1, Ephesians 1. What is our lasting possession? It's nothing on this earth. It's nothing of material value. It's nothing that we can hold in our hand because our hands will die someday and everything will be lost to us for eternity in a physical, material sense. But in the greatest sense of life, our focus ought to be not on things of the earth, but things in heaven. Colossians chapter 3 tells us. So don't become too emotionally attached as business people to whatever it is that God has given us, and don't forget that it's He who has given it to us.
Wow, that's powerful. That brings up all kind of pitches, but I'll hold them to after our next break. Warp and Woof Radio.
And we are back, Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Dr. Mark Eckel. We do this every Wednesday from 10 to noon, and we are pleased to be back with you today. We're talking about business principles from a Christian point of view. And Phil is throwing me sliders, curves, and all kinds of change-ups over here. So I can't wait to hear what the next series of questions might be.
Well, the next series of questions are really going to engage our audience listening ear, because we're going to be talking about business Christian principles in the community. And Mark, let me ask you this: discuss the Christian engagement with business principles as it relates to our community.
One of the supporters of Comenius actually is the CEO of a company, of a great company here in Indianapolis. And I taught a class a few years ago on vocation, which is out of my church, and he's a member there with me, and he heard this teaching on vocation, which is about work and so on. And this was in the fall of the year, so from September to December I taught this. Well, as a CEO of this big company, he turns around in January and begins to apply these principles in his company, and he actually starts off in January with the State of the Company address, where he actually talks about the book of Genesis and how we're supposed to be good stewards and how he wants to care for his people as they care for the product that they're creating and so on. And we're talking about a product that has national and international recognition that's actually created here in Indianapolis. It's called the Endangered Species Chocolate Company. Endangered Species Chocolate is actually made right here in Indianapolis, and it has tremendous connections. In fact, if you're an NPR listener, you can hear commercials for Endangered Species Chocolate on NPR any given time. Yeah, so there you go. When I think about that, I think about statements that come out of Scripture that help us to understand this. Here's a man who is a supporter of our nonprofit, but he is also a man who's doing great work in a great company, taking good care of his people. When I think about that, I'm thinking about Luke chapter 16, verses 1 to 9, where Jesus says that people who are good business people are making friends for heaven. Making friends for heaven. That's Luke chapter 16, 1-9. So what's the idea of making friends for heaven? Well, the money that you make is creating opportunities for nonprofits or Christian ministries that are doing good in the community, so that goodness that you've created within your company, we can see multiplied in the community itself. If you go back in church history, for instance, and you think about great business leaders like J.C. Penney or Welsh, for instance, the great leader of Welsh grape juice and Welsh jams and jellies. Both of these men were Christians, and they gave their basic bottom line dollar. In fact, by the time the end of his life rolled around, Welsh was giving all of his money that he made to nonprofits and Christian ministries and churches. So when I think about this, then my attention immediately turns to a place like 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9. Here's Paul, and he's saying to the Corinthians, who were really rich, by the way. They really had a lot of wealth. He says, now, I want to tell you about the Macedonian believers. And this is in chapter 8 of 2 Corinthians, verses 1-4. I want to tell you about these Macedonians who are really poor people, and they gave everything, and they gave all that they had as the widow's mite, kind of thing. And he's just pouring it on. He's telling them how poor they are, but how much they're giving. How poor they are, how much they're giving. And you can just imagine how rankled these Corinthians must have felt, hearing this thing. And then, of course, he starts off in chapter 8, verse 5, and he says, okay, now that you've heard about the Macedonians, basically, what are y'all going to do about this thing now? And then he goes all the way through chapter 9 dealing with that and saying, these are things that you ought to take to heart and remember the responsibility that you have. So when I think about community leaders, Christians in the community, I'm thinking, make as much as you can and give as much as you can.
Right. There's a direct relationship in giving and not running out. How do you, being one who is wealthy, compete with one who's a giver?
Yes.
That's powerful to me.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
Let me throw this one at you. How do business principles impact our Christian community?
Yeah. I always think about the Cathy family. Chick-fil-A.
Mm-hmm.
So Chick-fil-A, the Cathy family, they make a really good product. I don't even get their dipping sauce when I go to Chick-fil-A, man. I just like to eat the chicken because it's got such a great flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you all know that Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays.
Right.
And they're closed on Sundays for a very good reason, because the Cathy family are Christians, and they believe in the principle of taking care of their people, which means we're going to give everybody 6 days of work, but let them have 1 day off a week. That's a huge deal. So I had a student once who was a Chick-fil-A worker, actually a manager of one of the branches of Chick-fil-A. And I said, I hear all about, you're closed on Sunday and that's really good for the workers and all that. I said, I got to ask a question about your machinery. I said, does the 1 day off a week actually benefit the machinery? I mean, I didn't even get this question out of my mouth. And this guy gets all excited. He said, oh man, my machinery's lasting 4 times longer than that over at McDonald's. And he's pointing over, giving me the thumb over to McDonald's over here. And he said, my machinery lasts 4 times longer, and there's a reason for that. He said, I really do believe that machinery needs a rest as well. Well, gee, I wonder where this came from. You read the Bible, and all kinds of interesting things pop out. Exodus chapter 20, we get the 10 Commandments. The longest of the 10 Commandments is the one on Sabbath. Now, not only do people get time off, but what else?
Mm-hmm.
The animals who do the labor. Should we be surprised at all that if you're going to give people time off, then the labor-intensive machinery, the animals of the day, need time off as well? And shouldn't that then impact machinery today? Gee, how about that?
Wow.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
That's powerful in and of itself. But man, how much more powerful is it to give your mind time off? Give your mind time to recalibrate, refocus, and give your mind time to become excited again about going back in to do a better job. We talk about business principles and making sure that you care for your people. When you say care for your people, give us a couple of descriptions of what that might look like.
Oh, yeah. So caring for your people means, first of all, to me, encouragement. Are you going out on the floor where the product is being made and taking care of the people that are there on the floor? Are you invested in their holidays? Are you invested in them when their kids get sick? Are you asking about major important concepts that are important in their life? They've just purchased a house, for instance, or their kid's going off to college, whatever it might be. And then come alongside them while they're working and say, man, you're doing a great job. I want you to know that the thing that you're making right now, the time you're spending in this industry right now, this thing is helping somebody else. This product is going to be pushed out across the country, around the world, and it's going to do these things. And I want you to know that you are a tremendous, important part of that. I always think about the folks who were making the cathedrals, in the Middle Ages. And here are these guys, they're probably not living more than 30, 40, maybe 50 years of age. That's pretty much the longevity of anybody given in the Middle Ages. And here they are making these cathedrals that took 100 plus years to make. Well, what were they thinking? Mm-hmm. They were thinking, you know what, I'm probably going to be dead before this thing gets done, but what have I contributed to along the way? If, as a business owner, as a business leader, I'm concerned about my people, I'm going to talk to them about the long-term impact of not only who they are, but what they do and the kinds of contributions their work is making in the culture.
In that thought process, do you think that the workers of the company can sometimes take for granted the power that they have in just showing up for work? And should the business owner pay attention to that?
Sure. Yeah, showing up for work would be probably a good idea, or you might not have work, actually. Right. So, yeah, showing up for work is a powerful thing. When you use the phrase, though, take for granted, I'll say this. I think some workers, they will moan and complain and cry about whatever they're responsible for. It's just part of their job, but they do it anyway. I mean, we all do that to one degree or another. But our focus should always be on, hey, what is my responsibility to the whole company? Mm. If I don't do my job, am I letting somebody else down? If I don't show up for work, who's gonna have to take up the slack, and is that an imposition on their life? Am I causing problems for other people behind me? Am I only thinking about myself, or am I actually thinking about others who might have to pick up the slack someplace along the line? So yeah, the worker is huge. Their mentality is important.
So there's a sounds like a bidirectional responsibility in Christian business. One from the business owner's perspective, as well as one from the employee or laborer's
Sounds
perspective.
Like Warp and Woof to me, man.
Nah, intertwining and interweaving.
Right.
Wow, that's awesome. Mark, I know you are a movie guy. Are there any movies that come to mind when we talk about Christian business and business principles?
Sure. Let me mention a couple old ones that I think are important for the points that they make, and then I'll mention a couple of newer ones for the positive spin on this. Modern Times with Charlie Chaplin. How are we treating the workers? This is a 1936 movie, but Modern Times is a really powerful film, and everybody should watch it, especially business leaders. How are we treating our people? Citizen Kane, 1941, probably one of the most important films that's ever been made, is actually ranked by Forbes. Now, we're talking about Forbes here, a predominantly important business ownership group. Forbes ranks this as the most important business movie of all time. Why? Because they're focused on the price that was paid by the people around this megalomaniac who didn't treat people well. A couple of newer films, though, that I think are really powerful and good. I would be remiss if I didn't mention HGTV and folks like Chip and Joanna Gaines down in Waco, Texas, their Fixer Upper program at HGTV. Here are two Christian folks, Chip and Joanna Gaines, who are doing great work, and their focal point, of course, is to help people, to benefit people by the kinds of purchases that they make. A couple of movies I would suggest would be movies like 100-Foot Journey with Helen Mirren. If you're not familiar with that, there are a number of movies like this, by the way, that deal with the food industry. A very powerful and important statement about how you take care of people, not only the people that are doing the work for you, but the people that are coming to your restaurant. I could talk all day about this stuff, but I'll cut it off there.
Oh, that sounds great. I could listen and learn from it all day. We're about ready to wrap up our first hour, and coming back is going to be very, very exciting, as we do have special guests in the studio, Bud Ruby, good friend, personal friend of mine, Isaac Walters, and his company. Looking forward to coming back to Warping Woof Radio. Welcome back to Warping Woof Radio. Mark, we're having a great show, an exciting time here today. I am blessed to receive a wealth of knowledge and information from you, as always, when I get to sit in for HB. And I think I'm going to have to put some more stuff on his calendar. We've got our two guests in the studio, Bud Ruby, who's a Christian Life personal and business coach, and Isaac Walters with Walters Inc. And he's got a real estate investment business, and particularly centered around helping veterans step into home ownership. Isaac's also a veteran, served in our U.S. military, and we appreciate him for that. But Mark, before we bring our guests on, remind us of biblical philosophy of business.
I can make this real simple, Phil. Real simple.
Okay.
Bottom line in business is take care of your people. You take care of your people, they'll take care of the product, and the product will be pristine, and everybody will appreciate it, and they'll think you're brilliant. But the brilliance is in taking care of your people.
Man, that is real simple, to the point. And when we were talking about that in our last segment, a TV show comes to mind. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it puts in perspective for the business owner when they go down undercover and work with their people. Undercover boss, and you know, I'm not ashamed to say it, man. I've learned to watch that show with a box of tissue.
That's right. There you go. Absolutely.
It gets me every time. I'm gonna watch it. I'm just watching it for the principles of it. I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna allow my emotions to get into it. But the show really focuses on the owner to pay attention. You got to take care. You got to take care of your people. You got to take care of your people. On to that. Speaking of caring of people, our next two guests have done a very good job of taking care of me. And I appreciate them. I love both of these guys. They've been very instrumental in the restoration period of my life. And as we opened up the show talking about them, Bud does it with such grace. Isaac is straight to the point, fire and brimstone. I'm going to tell you how it is, straight up. To your face, no chase. This is Phil, what you need to do. This is what you're not doing. This is why you're doing what you're doing. And more often than not, I'm sitting on the other end of the phone, got it on mute, going, but I got to listen to him because he's right. I want both of these guys, starting with Mr. Bud Ruby, to introduce himself, his business, and then we'll go to Isaac Walters, and we'll start jumping into them with some questions about business principles. Bud Ruby, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I feel blessed to be here. Essentially what I try and do is to, as a coach, to work with people to support their efforts to make the changes in life that they say they want to make. It's certainly not about me telling them the changes they need to make, because that doesn't work. You and I have talked many times about this term called buy-in. And buy-in is very important, and it needs to be established up front. And buy-in is the perspective of the person that I'm working with, not my perspective. Earlier in the first hour, culture was talked about, and how important it can be to create the right kind of culture. Many times the people that I work with, the culture they have to generate within themselves is that they are good people, that they do good things, but unfortunately a lot of times we're so self-critical that we don't always realize the wellness, the goodness that's within us. I used to coach people, a coaching company here in Indianapolis, and a lot of it was done over the phone. And I used to try and create an image where they hopefully would want to reach back and pat themselves on the back when they did a good thing. And so I would tell them, okay, then stick your arm out. Well, put your arm out in front of you. No, I can see it. Don't go ahead, put your arm out in front of you. And I have them reach back and pat themselves on the back. It was humorous, of course. but it was a visual thing that they could see, feel, touch, and do. And some told me that it was very beneficial to do that. Coach's first job is to be a cheerleader and to be a supporter and an encourager, which was also talked about in the first hour, to allow people to understand and express the goodness that's within them. So that's what I try to do individually. That's what I try and do corporately. The difference between coaching and mentoring is coaching gives people the opportunity to create answers for themselves, which I believe we should always try and do. Mentoring is mentors brought in generally. Let me back up just a second. For example, if someone invited me to be a mentor to someone who was an architect, I couldn't do it because I don't know anything about the architectural business or design. If somebody wants to have me mentor them with teaching or coaching or other aspects of business, I'm only as qualified as my experiences. I am not educated to be a counselor, and no way mean to be. But sometimes people, what would you do? And my reaction to that is, here's what happened in my life, and here's how I reacted to it. Hopefully that can be beneficial for you. If not, we can go for further discussion. So creating a culture, working a culture, supporting a culture, allowing people to know that there is a culture and that a culture can change is very important. Is what I do.
Great. Mr. Isaac Leroy Walters. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Phil. In your face, yeah, that comes from the background of basketball. There's no room for being timid. You must execute or get eaten. And I was pretty hungry, so I did most of the eating. I was not very often eaten. But what I do today is real estate investment opportunities. What I did, I was 63 years old before I bought my first home. And when I sat across the table, I looked around and I saw everyone getting a piece of the pie. And I wasn't getting any. I got something, I got the home. But at the end of the day, my joy in being a homeowner was short-lived when I looked at how much I lost because I didn't know the right questions to ask or what to do with a particular situation. Even though I had a mentor in the form of a real estate agent, they were supposed to guide me through this process. They got paid, and I'm not saying that they did a bad job. But in retrospect, when I look back on it, I said they could have did a lot better. When I got out of the military, I stayed out. I had broken service, so I joined in 1969. I got out in 79. I went back in. I got out in 78. I went back in 79 and stayed till 86. So when I got out the first time, I was excited and high. Vietnam era, and there was so much going on around the country, and I was just enjoying being free for the first time, not having anybody tell me what to do, where to go, anything like that. And I procrastinated. 181 days after I got out of the military, I decided that I wanted to buy a home. And they told me had I came in the day before, they could have used my revenue from while I was on active duty as a source of income. But because of that one day, I was now unemployed, and therefore I had no work history. What do you mean I have no work history? I did 9 years for you guys. What do you mean no work history? I just had a vacation here. Well, we're sorry, this is the law. So the military does a good job of training us to be soldiers, airmen, sailors. They do nothing when it comes to teaching us how to reintegrate back into society. Now, what this program is all about, God first. He is the source of all of that. And what happens from my personal experience is that God is pushed back. And we're taught to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, depending on one another. And those who have Christian values are removed. They usually go into some place like medical or they're conscientious objectors. They are not in the mix. So that's a different dynamics altogether. So when we come back out, That's the part that's missing. We're wounded in a sense that no one can see, even though we look to be healthy on the outside. Internally, we're separated. And in my opinion, and I have no way of proving it, the original sin for me is Adam was separated from God. And when that happened, we started our process of trying to get back to him, and we couldn't get back to him save Jesus. If Jesus don't come and do what he did, we're still out there wandering around in the darkness. We can't get back home. And that's the problem I see today. I keep trying to do what is designed for God to do. He says, I desire obedience, not sacrifice.
Wow. That's a lot coming at us, Mark. Do you have any questions that you would like to?
Oh, I have so many questions. I spend my life asking students questions, so I'm looking forward to hitting you guys with some questions here. Now, in our first hour, we focused on biblical business principles. If you have any biblical business principles, which it sure sounds like you both do, then how do you apply this in your businesses? What specifically, maybe you could choose one or two, each of you, and then tell how they actually apply to what you do.
Well, the main thing is to, from a coaching perspective, the main thing is to find out what your employees, your friends, the people that you're involved with, what they want, what they're looking for. Buy-in. When we sometimes try and, I don't like this word, but I'm going to use it, when we try and dictate to people what our expectations are, what we want them to do, it's not the same thing, obviously, as allowing them to come up with their own solutions, allowing us to tell them what's important in their life. I think many of the times creating that culture that we've talked about is not allowed simply because people don't know how to begin it. And I think we begin, there's a saying that goes, and I'm sure we've all heard of it, to be understood, first you must understand. And the only way that we can really understand is by, say you spend your life asking questions, believe it, I do too. Because I need to understand the person that's in front of me, the company that's in front of me, the organization that's in front of me, before I can begin to give them the opportunity to make the changes they want to make. We discussed off mic a little bit before is that Bud Ruby changes no one. God changes people. I can perhaps offer people some choices, but they get to make those choices. One thing I did not mention in my opportunity for biography was the fact that I've been working in prison ministry since 2004, and I went into prisons between 2004 and 2011. And then I went into a level 3 prison. There are 4 levels in prison in the state of Indiana. Level 3, actually, the guys have a reasonable chance of getting out. And they're not in for probably more than 15 years for any one particular breaking of the law. And they began calling me when they got out, and I didn't mind that at all. They didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't have a job. They didn't have a house. They didn't know what they were going to do. So I got involved in reentry ministry. And that's when I began to talk a lot about choices. I think a lot of us can say, maybe that's an assumption, so let me back off of that. What I can say for myself is that never for the grace of God could go I. I've done some things in my life that, I didn't rob banks or anything like that. But I used to be in the fine wine business, and I can tell you there were nights when I drove home that I shouldn't be driving, shouldn't have been driving home. So it's about allowing people to understand and to talk about the things they did that got them incarcerated. Would they do it again? If they would do it again, how would they do it differently? What are the roadblocks to keep that from happening? And how can I come alongside of you and support your efforts to make those changes? When we do that, when our first interest is about those that God puts in front of us, I also shared it one time, I wondered, God, why are you putting this person in front of me? And then I got smart and said, thank you, Lord, for putting this person in front of me, and please just don't allow me to mess it up. So far, for the most part, I think he's allowed me not to mess it up too bad.
Sounds like a very, very much of an others-centered point of view. Certainly,
Absolutely.
which is the Christian approach. Isaac, how about you? What business principles that come out of a Christian origin would you suggest you use in your business?
I'm not sure exactly where in Scripture it's at, but somewhere it says, leave something for the reaper.
Yeah.
Don't take it all. If I only put X amount of dollars into a property and I only paid so much for it, then that's my break even. And usually I'm not going to go into this business. I'm in the business to make money, of course, okay?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm not going to just break even. I've got to make a profit. But let's just say, for throwing numbers out there, for example, just say $100,000. I put $60,000 into the $100,000 property. After repair value is $100,000, I put $60,000 in. I'm entitled to $100,000. I don't have to get $100,000. Why don't I give you a break? Why don't I let you buy the property with some equity? Why don't I let you leave the table? This is what my experience was personally. I left the table with no equity. I left the table with debt. When there was room for equity, had there been a Christian principle in play, leave something for the reaper. That's how it equates for me.
Wow. That's a huge issue. Actually, we were talking about that. Let's Leviticus 19, where you leave something for those who are coming behind. Absolutely, yeah. The issue of the gleaner is a big deal. Phil, why don't we take a musical break here, and we'll come back and we'll ask our guests some more questions. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio on RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio. You'll hear us every Wednesday morning from 10 till noon, and we have a power-packed show today where we are discussing Christian business principles with Isaac and Ruby, and we're going to come back to these questions, these fine gentlemen here in the studio with us today. Gentlemen, I wanted to take this in a different direction. When we talk about your business, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your day-to-day work. So how would you describe what it is that you do day to day from a Christian businessman's point of view?
Okay. That's really hard for me to put into words. It starts business-wise, I guess, how I get up. When I get up, my first thing is to clear away the cobwebs, give God some space, and seek His guidance. What would you have me do today? And then ultimately try to do no harm. I try not to hurt anybody by saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And being that I come from a different background, and my history being of the streets, I've got problems or had problems with drugs and alcohol. So one of the books that I read and focus on has to do with meditation and preparing myself to go out and not hurt anybody. And it also tells me that on my best days, even when I'm doing everything right, when I'm hitting on all 4 cylinders, I don't have an 8-cylinder anymore, just 4 cylinders. I've got all 4 cylinders in sequence with one another. I'm still prone to hurt someone. So how do I do it on a daily basis? I get up in the morning, I give God that space, and then I move forward. And I can't really define it any better than that, because sometimes I find a deal, sometimes I don't find a deal. But every day I'm out there looking for a deal. People are people, and they challenge me at every turn. And I have to remember that they God's children too.
There you go. Wow. That's a great way to start this. Go for it, man.
Well, from my perspective, I wake up every morning excited. One of the things I have learned is that God will put people in front of me. I don't know who they're going to be. I don't know what they might need, but God will make sure that it happens the way He wants it to happen. There are all kinds of expressions that we can use. Be a disciple, make a disciple. I do try and work at that. I evangelize in a way that most people would not call it evangelizing. Probably, I've shared this with my friend Philip, probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. In response to "have a nice day," I would say "have a blessed day." The responses I've gotten from that, have been utterly amazing. People stop, they look at me. Who is this guy? Is he a holy roller? What's this have a blessed day stuff? But a lot of times I get a smile. In fact, most of the time I get a smile, I get a thank you, and I get, well, you have a blessed day too. I've had people stop, turn around, come back and say, no one's ever said that to me before. And my response to that is, well, I'm sorry that's never happened. It's happened now. What would you like to do with it? Well, I don't know. My response to that is, that's a fair answer to a question that perhaps you hadn't thought about or hadn't been asked before. So it's about, again, I work at coaching all the time. One of the things Phil can tell you is that I'm consistent with what I do. And that is to give people the opportunity to be the best that they can be. Not that I can teach them, but the Bible talks about modeling, and it talks about how God would like us to model ourselves after the life of Jesus Christ, and we all realize what a lousy job we do of that. But the main thing is God wants us to continue to try to do that. And we've seen billboards all over the place that say, you never fail till you quit trying. And I believe that's absolutely right, because if we keep trying, we always have the chance for success. So it's about giving people the opportunity to be the best they can be, to encourage them, to uplift them. We're talking about opportunities to do that. When Phil and I met in this ministry, I would come in every morning that I came in, and I didn't come in 5 days a week, but between 3 and 4 days a week. I would always go around. It wasn't a big place, but I always go around and look for something positive to say to everyone that was there. It was not, I worked very hard at not making it contrived. If I didn't find something that I could honestly say something about, I'd come back later in the day. But before I left, everyone would get a positive word. It's just something that I've believed in, and God has certainly encouraged within me. So.
Who has, in terms of your own experiences, who has spoken into your lives individually that has given you the platform from which you now speak into the lives of others?
Well, I again, off mic, we talked about this Christian experience. They call them fourth day events, and this one was the Great Banquet. I go to a Presbyterian church. I'm a Christian first and foremost, but I attend a Presbyterian church. And this is offered, and it's 72 hours of kind of Christianity 101. It's lay-driven, not pastorally. It's just one of those experiences that I had that taught me I needed it, gave me direction of the changes that I needed to make in my life. Again, please, Lord, don't let me mess it up too much. And in order to be successful at whatever we want to do, we need to make sure that we're intentional about it. And intentionality is a word that everybody throws around. It's a great word to use. There are certain words. Well, in 2000 to 2005, here's the word that was used. And Jerry Seinfeld, for a long time, there was a yada, yada, yada. There was always that when people would get tired of actually talking about something. So it's just about caring about others and letting them know that you care.
All right. Isaac?
There was 2 occasions for me. I couldn't swim, and I'm in the Navy.
Okay.
So I had to go to swim class. On the last possible day for me to pass this class, or I'd be set back and have to do 12 more weeks of basic training, I passed the swim test. And I'm on my way back to the barracks from the pool, and it's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it gets bright as noon, and I hear a voice say, "Mama can't help you." So I look around and see who's talking to me, and I didn't see anybody, and then the voice said, "Daddy can't help you. It's me and you now." And it went back to dusk dark, and I took off running.
Wow.
And I never really spoke about that for another 20 years. I never told anybody what happened. I didn't. So in answer to the question, who inspired me? God himself. He spoke directly to me. And then he spoke again in 2005, and he says, "Aren't you tired yet? I've carried you all this far. I'm 53 years old at this point. Aren't you tired by now?" And then the change took place, and I continue to speak recovery. in everybody's life that I meet, whether it be from drugs and alcohol or just doubt and uncertainty. See, I'm a firm believer that faith and doubt can't abide in the same house. They're diabolically opposed. It's one or the other. And when I have doubt, that's the opportunity for me to exercise some faith and let God take the foreground. Let Him take the forefront. And the songwriter says, "Rock of Ages, cleft for me. Let me hide myself in Thee." So when the storm comes, when the trouble comes, I know where to go run to.
That's great. Great examples.
May I follow?
Yeah.
While I didn't particularly talk about any one individual, through my great banquet experience and my Kairos prison ministry experience, what I learned was from a community of Christian men. Not any one person in particular, but looking at people who modeled, I talked about modeling, who modeled to me what it looked like to be a Christian man. So while there's no one in particular that jumps out at me, there's a lot of people that jump out at me.
Yeah,
Sounds like that whole team concept.
Yeah, team concept. There's wisdom in the multitude of counselors.
Of counselors, yeah. Phil, we got to take one more break.
Yes, sir.
And when we come back, we'll just have about another 12 minutes or so, and we will wrap up with these great guests we have here, Isaac and Ruby. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We are back, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. This is Warp and Woof Radio. We have some of the best stuff that goes on in between our segments as much as we do on air. And I'm getting schooled in here by a couple of great guys who have some tremendous influences here. But we wanted to start this last segment of time here by having you tell us some of the stories of people whose lives have been changed by the influence of your work. So whoever wants to jump in on that one first.
All right. I'll jump right in there. There's two, my nephew and my brother. And both of them, having seen where I came from and where I arrived at, have embarked on their own business ventures to do what I've talked about. Again, I talked about leaving something for the reaper. That was the brother who has a janitorial service in Katy, Texas. Office Pride is the plug, his commercial section of it. That's what he does. And then Maurice Barnes here in Indianapolis, who's my sister's youngest son, who started a franchise of Jana King, and has since moved on from Jana King. But I implanted that seed into both of them about the janitorial service because of my experience and what I knew how to do. And trying to do that, I wasn't involved with them personally, but I did give them the food for thought. If you're going to try this, you might want to remember this, you might want to consider that. For my nephew, I took him down to Bank One and showed him how easy it really was to apply for the business. They came back and told us what we needed to improve on for us to get that business, and then some things transpired. I wasn't in recovery yet. I was still back on the other side of things, so it didn't pan out. It wasn't the time for it. Didn't work out for me, but it worked out for my nephew.
Those are great stories.
Well, I guess I would say this is an easy question and a hard question. What makes it hard for me is that I really never cared about or worried about or thought about the influence that I had, because it was never about the influence I had. It was about the influence that God has over all of us. And that might sound a little sanctimonious, but it's not meant to be. However, I worked for a coaching company that had a large global client, and the way it would work is mid-level managers would come in for a 3-day seminar, and then there'd be 90 days of follow-up coaching. I participated in both. As one of the clients that I spoke with, my first question to him was, how may I best serve you? What are your struggles? And by the way, your company has said you can talk about what is going on professionally, or if something in your personal life is bothering you, you may share that and look for some support or assistance in that. And right away, this particular gentleman decided he wanted to talk about the fact that he was working a lot of extra hours and was feeling guilty about not having more time with his family, especially his son. And my question was, well, what would you like to change about that, and how do you see that happening? Well, I want to have more time, and I decided that I'm going to build a fort for him. And I said, that's great. What's that look like? He said, first of all, I've got to, draw up the plans. My response to him was, who's going to draw up the plans? And he said, I'm going to draw up the plans. And I said, would you get any additional time with your son, or would you gain any benefit by allowing him to participate in that process? Oh, well, I hadn't thought about it that way. Can you think about it that way? Yes, I can. Would you find that to be beneficial? Oh, yeah, I think I would. 2 weeks later, I invited my son in. It was great. He had better ideas than I had, so on and so forth. Well, it progressed in that. I said, well, what's next? And, well, I need to go buy the supplies that we need. And my question was, who's going to go buy the supplies that you need? And so over the course of about 3 or 4 sessions, got to the point where it went from I to we. And the last time we talked about it, he broke down in tears. He broke me down in tears. And how he said I had changed his life by allowing him to think about things differently. And I said, I didn't change your life. I said, you changed your life. And if I gave you some suggestions or things to think about, great. But you made the changes. You did the heavy lifting. I didn't do it. How do you feel about that?
These are great stories, kind of stories that move people into action. I've always thought that stories are the generators, that kind of move us down the road a little bit when we hear other people talking about this. So tell us now, you talked about some individuals, talk about some businesses or company leaders who you have seen become involved in biblical business principles, and how has that unfolded for them? We're talking about business leaders and companies themselves. How has your kind of influence in that way been beneficial to those companies?
Well, I was blessed to work with a large roofing company at one time. One of the owners was a personal friend of mine. He began working with me on an individual personal coaching level, and then decided that he wanted to bring me into the business. And when I asked him the question, how may I be most beneficial to your company? Is he said, well, whatever you do, I'd like you to try and introduce a spiritual concept to what you have to say. I said, I can do that, but it will only be as successful as people receive it and are willing to receive it. Long and short is he sold out his ownership because the other owner was not buying into or agreeing with any kind of idea of spirituality in the business. To carry that forward, you have spoken about it, and in your first hour and off mic we've talked about how to really be successful is to care about the people that work for you. And if you do that and also take care of your clients in the same way, the business takes care of itself, because you are modeling and showing people a way to be successful other than just how many widgets can you sell today.
Isn't that the truth?
Yes. So that was a situation where, unfortunately, and this was probably 6-7 years ago, I still don't think it's changed. And I'd be lying if I say I pray for that business every day, but occasionally I pray for that business to change that culture.
So the idea of receiving, you're given information, you're given help, but the other person has to receive it. That's a big deal.
There's no question, as I mentioned before, I really buy into that term, buy-in.
Buy-in,
yes.
Yeah, you've got to participate. Isaac, how about you? What have you seen in this respect?
I personally have contributed nothing that I can think of, but there is one that does come to mind, and that's office pride, because one of the things my brother told me about his selection of that franchise was the spiritual principles, the fact that he is a minister, and when he started, trying to back up just a little bit, he worked some 30 years for a petroleum company, and they gave him a promotion, and then because he was the last promoted, he was the first to be let go when they downsized. So now he has to do a change in life, and he's desperate. He's got to do something because he's got these 3 boys, a wife, and mortgages and things to meet. So he's looking. That's where I told him about the janitorial service. So he's asking me some more questions about this and blah 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 blah. And he ultimately, when he looked into office pride, he said it was the spiritual concept, the religious, the biblical teaching and principles that they stood on that made him go with that company. So office pride comes to mind for me.
That's a great story. We've just got a couple of minutes left, gentlemen. If you could, in 30 seconds, kind of tell us, leave us with a last word. What would your last word be that you want to leave our listeners with here this week?
Become a servant.
Become a servant.
Become a servant, and to show, and you can't see it, but I'm putting air quotes around, teach other people to be the same. I'm certified to be a coach, and I'm certified to coach others to become coaches. And one of the things that Phil can tell you is, if a coach does a good job, he works himself right out of the job.
Isn't that the truth?
And so it's about serving others, becoming a servant leader.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that a lot, Bud. Isaac?
Service. I can't. You summed it up, but that's it. I'll end with this. I'm going to serve something.
Bob
A
Dylan?
servant is all I can ever hope to be. I'm either going to serve God in heaven or the devil in hell. Service. That's all I got.
There it
Amen.
is. That sounds like a theme there. What do
Yeah.
you think about that, Phil?
I like that, and I would just like to drop this as we depart. In my quest and walking through Proverbs 16, verses 3 and 4, paraphrasing, commit thy ways, thy works unto the Lord, and he will establish your plans to a proper end.
That's great. Well, it's been a great week. Again, a great show. Isaac Walters, Bud Ruby, and Phil. Thanks for filling in for HB today. We appreciate it a lot. This is Warp and Woof Radio. You'll listen to us every Wednesday here at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. You'll hear us again next week when we have a great group coming in to talk about food for souls. Food for souls. You won't want to miss it. Next week, 10 to 12, Warp and Woof Radio. We'll see you then.